What's up, everybody? It's Walter, your favorite historian and professor. Today's date is June 24th, 2026. So, of course, in Maryland yesterday, we had our primary elections. Maryland, of course, is a closed primary system. Only Democrats can vote for Democratic candidates. Only Republicans vote for Republican candidates. All right. And I know that pretty much leaves independents out in the cold here in Maryland. So, yes, if you are an independent, you are more or less disenfranchising yourself for all intents and purposes because you can't vote till the general election. And in Maryland, most of our jurisdictions are decided by the primaries, okay? But anyway, after all that said, I want to talk about one particular contest out of the dozens that we had here yesterday. The Republican primary election for governor of Maryland. Now, of course, incumbent Democratic Governor Wes Moore is absolutely seeking a second term to be governor of Maryland. He pretty much ran without any serious opposition, and I believe he garnered well over 86, 87% of the vote. Okay, it was at least one other no-name candidate running against him, but it didn't make any difference one way or another. Governor Moore handily won the Democratic. We re-won the Democratic nomination to be governor of our great state. Now, on the Republican side, though, you had two main contenders, Ed Hale and Dan Cox. Now, of course, Ed Hale is a lifelong Democrat who switched parties to be able to mount a campaign against Governor Moore. Dan Cox, of course, is a former Frederick County delegate who ran against Wes Moore in 2022 when the governor seat was open. Now, in 2022, Wes Moore destroyed Dan Cox in the election. I mean, he made mincemeat out of him, which is what leads me to make this video. Now, you remember that I just said that Ed Hale's a lifelong Democrat who switched parties to a Republican to be able to mount a campaign against Moore. We all know that Ed Hale is about as Republican as, Russia believes in free and fair elections. Non-existent. Okay? And we know he was a liberal Democrat who was just masquerading as a Republican just to be able to mount a campaign against Wes Moore. All right, I respect the struggle. But I guess that's probably why he did not fare so well in the contest. I think Maryland Republicans firmly saw that. And they decided to overwhelmingly vote for Dan Cox. Dan Cox will do no better this time around, in my opinion, than he did in 2022. Or as a matter of fact, he might do worse. Now, there is a possibility that he may pick up some votes in stray jurisdictions that he did not get in 2022, but I highly doubt it. Now, and that leads me to make this further bold declaration that Maryland Republicans ain't too bright, okay? If you were serious about toppling Governor Moore from office, why in the fook would you make Dan Cox the nominee? If you remember from back in 2022, let's regurgitate the facts, Dan Cox was destroyed by Wes Moore, okay? And this was an open contest, all right? Larry Hogan was leaving and the governor's seat was open. Wes Moore annihilated Dan Cox back in 2022, arguably when Cox may have stood a better chance because you were running for an open seat. Now, Cox would be running against an incumbent, and you don't need a PhD in political science to understand that running against an incumbent, even a mildly unpopular one, is much more difficult than running for an open seat. All right, that incumbent has really got to be, pardon my French, fucking up to be able to throw them out of office. Okay? And in addition to that, the person who's trying to throw them out of office gotta have something working for them. First of all, there's nothing wrong with Dan Cox as a person, but his views are just much too extreme for Maryland. I've had the opportunity of conversing with him, and you know I'm a die-hard Democrat, but I believe in absolutely having dialogue with anybody. I believe in working across the aisle, and I had a conversation with him. A lot of his ideas are not bad, but they're too extreme for Maryland, okay? This is not Florida. This is not Alabama. This is not Texas. Hell, this ain't even Pennsylvania. Maryland is a dyed-in-the-wool blue state. Yes, we have committed red jurisdictions, mainly the Eastern Shore and Western Maryland, but Central Maryland, which is where, 70% of the population of the state is solidly blue, purple at best in some places. So Dan Cox's views are much too right-wing for a purple-leaning, at times, blue state, only when it comes to gubernatorial elections. All right, that's the only statewide office where Marylanders are willing to give Republicans a chance. When it comes to Attorney General, forget it. When it comes to Comptroller, forget it. And this is all to educate mainly most of you who are not familiar with how Maryland politics work, and even some of you live in Maryland who might not be all that familiar with how politics work here. All right. The governor's office is the only statewide office where Republicans are competitive. If you're running for any other statewide office as a Republican in Maryland, you might as well not even waste your time. It's not going to happen. And even to be elected as a Republican in Maryland, to be governor, thousands of Democrats would have to cross over to vote for you. Please understand that fact, which means they are not going to cross over and vote for a extreme MAGA Trump endorsed guy. Not in the old line state. That ain't gonna happen. There's a greater likelihood of you seeing people sitting on the beach in Antarctica, good luck with that one, than the people of Maryland vote a Trump endorsed MAGA candidate in as governor. It's not gonna happen. It's not feasible, totally untenable. So I have to ask Maryland Republicans, why didn't you vote for Ed Hale? At least he may have been a little more competition for Wes Moore, but Dan Cox stands no chance, okay? He's too extreme in his views, for Maryland anyway. I mean, Ed Hale would have certainly been a far more moderate candidate that certainly would have been liberal, but definitely may have tempered some of the excesses that many perceive the Moore administration of pursuing. All right. To me, for you Maryland Republicans out there, Hale was your best shot at unseating Wes Moore. But in electing Dan Cox to be the Republican nominee for governor of Maryland in 2026, giving us another Moore-Cox contest 4 years later, Maryland Republicans have all but guaranteed Wes Moore a second term in office. Literally. All right. So if you are displeased in any way, shape or form about the performance of Wes Moore as governor of Maryland, and you are a Maryland Republican, you have no one but yourselves to blame. For you had a reasonable candidate in Ed Hale, who honestly may have stood a chance of winning, certainly far more than Dan Cox could ever hope to win in this state. All right, because you had a lot of independents and a lot of Democrats who honestly were not in favor of giving Wes Moore a second term. And Ed Hale would have certainly been more palatable to many independents and Democrats in Maryland. Certainly, I would have thought Republicans who, having a Democrat turned Republican, that they could work with. All right, Hale's a Democrat turned Republican. They could have worked with him. Democrats and independents could have worked with him. But by selecting the extreme Dan Cox, you all have essentially shot yourselves in the foot and given Governor Wes Moore a second term. So you might as well throw out the victory parties now, because Maryland won't see a Republican governor for at least the next 4 years. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the matter. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next video. Professor Shelton, the Blue Collar Scholar, out. Peace.